April 26th meeting of the Environmental Commission to order at 7:01. Matt, will you please call roll?
I will. Commissioner Apple. Councilperson Bannister.
Here.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Here.
Commissioner Graham.
Here.
Commissioner Hanna. Commissioner Hutton. Commissioner Mursky.
Here.
Commissioner Morocco. Commissioner Needham.
Here.
Commissioner Rigo. Commissioner Skinner.
Here.
Commissioner Slavic.
7 made it, and 8 makes it for sure.
And Councilperson Smith.
Present.
You have a quorum for this evening.
Thank you. All right, in
Gary.
front of you, you have a draft of tonight's agenda. Are there any additions or corrections?
We're going to add the minutes for last meeting.
That's right, yes, I knew that, and I have that later in my list. So is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
The agenda is approved. So you have in front of you drafts from 2 meetings, the first one being way back in September of 2016. We forgot to approve these minutes. Are there any corrections or questions about the meeting minutes? Is there a motion to approve the September 2016 minutes? Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The September 2016 minutes stand approved as distributed. You also have draft minutes of the March 2018 meeting. Are there any corrections or questions about the meeting minutes? Is there a motion to approve?
Second. Oh,
All in favor?
Sorry.
All in favor?
Aye.
The March 2018 minutes are approved. Public commentary. Is there anyone here this evening to offer public comment? Okay, we will move on to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business before the commission?
Nope.
New business. We have a presentation from the city administrator about sustainability.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for the opportunity to spend some time with you tonight. What I'd like to do is look through the fiscal year 19 budget with a focus on the sustainability initiatives that are included. The beginning of this is pretty much similar to what I presented to council when the budget was introduced. So if you are hooked on local government and watch CTN a lot, you'll have seen some of these slides before. But towards the end, I hope what I have will stimulate a discussion about the initiatives for this year, but also the coming year. My intent as we look towards fiscal year 20 and beyond is to bring this presentation to all of the commissions earlier in the budget cycle so we can have a meaningful discussion, get all the input from our citizen volunteers and the expertise that lives in our community so that we can tie the expenditure of our tax dollars to the outcomes that the community would like to see. So in a sense, I apologize for this being so late in the process this year, but I'll walk through during the presentation. We are in a 2-year budget cycle, and we really don't make a lot of changes in the second year of the plan. But this is as much as anything about establishing the discipline of coming to you and leveraging the expertise that's here. Oops. So just some overview. I talked about what the purpose is for this evening. I did present the proposed budget to council on April 16th. And by charter, the council has to adopt the budget at its second meeting in May, which will be on us before we know it. The public hearing for this year's budget is scheduled for May 7th, which promises to be both an interesting, exciting, and full evening for council and all interested parties. As I mentioned, we're on a 2-year cycle, so this is the second year. And really, all we're presenting is changes to the plan and some strategic effort. As I said, next year, as we start in the budget, probably later this calendar year, we'll come back and have a good discussion about what you'd like to see in next year's budget. And that'll constitute a pretty deep dive into the means and methods of service delivery, and then figure out how we want to coordinate services with our strategic plans. Certainly, if you have questions as we go through this, since this is a smaller and more informal group, we can entertain those as you have them. On the left side of this slide is everybody's favorite chart that shows only about 25 cents out of each property tax dollar actually comes to the city of Ann Arbor. This year, recurring revenues will go up a little bit over 1.5%. Property tax receipts should go about 3.27, mostly through introduction of new properties and increase in value of properties. The city, village, and township revenue sharing, which is the state aid, the statutory part, increases by about 4.4%. We do have a small decrease in the city property tax rate, but that is obviously offset by increase in value. We do expect to receive a $2.2 million rebate from the county public safety and community health millage that was passed last year. We get that money back because we operate our own police force. And council, as you can see, has made several allocations for that money. 40% goes to affordable housing. An item of particular interest to this commission is the 40% that goes to climate action, and then 20% to pedestrian safety. But I would also say, given your mission and your perspective on the world, you're interested in all three of those things. From an expenditure standpoint, the total expenditures are just under $400 million. We tend to focus on the general fund the most, and that's what I'll walk through. But you can see that's only a small part of the total expenditures. All of our fund balances remain within city policy goals, which means every one of our funds is at least at 15% of unrestricted funds. Our general obligation bond rating remains at AA+, which ensures we get good rates if and when we have to borrow money. And as I said, the increase to the typical property owner is $3.29 a month for taxes and $5.61 per month in utilities cost. If you have been watching some of the council meetings, you will note that we are going to introduce a change in water and wastewater rate structure, which I think you talked about at a previous meeting. The reason for that is to achieve proper balance and allocation of the cost so that as you use more water, you pay more per gallon. And it's appropriate to do that because if you are a larger consumer, that's what drives the additional sizing of our facilities, and therefore it's allocated appropriately. It's wholly consistent with state law, and it is best practice. The other part of the increase is sinking funds to pay for future improvements to our facilities. Some new funding priorities that are in the budget. We are going to spend a substantial amount of money on street lighting. It's a problem that was introduced several years ago when we went on a street lighting moratorium. Some of that money is to replace existing street lights that have become unsafe and will continue to deteriorate, but a good portion of it is for new street lighting. The chart we showed council showed that by allocating the additional funding, from an asset management standpoint, the vast majority of our lighting systems will be in satisfactory or better condition, and we'll maintain them that way. We are going to take $200,000 and put that towards electronic speed signs. We did put one at Huron High School about a year ago. It's been highly effective. That actually has and will become the standard for our schools that are on major arterials. As I promised Councilmember Lum, we're going to continue to look for other sources of funds as well through grants, but we shouldn't put kids crossing major roads at risk. We are also going to look at do an ADA accessibility compliance study. You can see on the public safety side, we are putting 2 officer FTEs back into the police department, which will help with road patrol enforcement. The police department will become accredited in July. They will become CALIA accredited. As I learned, only 0.5% of all police departments nationwide achieve that level of accreditation. And there's $25,000 in there as a placeholder for the Community Policing Commission, which I hope to get up and running this fall so that it can have a meaningful role in the selection of our new police chief. We are going to subsidize some affordable housing operating support as the Housing Commission starts to get a little bit more robust in its funding. That's really a one-time effort. Under climate and energy, we did add staff this past year in a mid-year adjustment to make the 2 temporary positions permanent. And I know that was of great interest to the commission as well. And in working with Mr. Mirsky, we decided that putting some money aside to plan for how we're going to spend that allocation was prudent, because you can't really go from 0 to $1 million without some financial whiplash if you don't have a plan to pay for the things. And then on the resource management side, there's just some things that deal with annexations, appraisal services. We do need to put money aside for the Barton and Superior Dam upgrades as well. So those are kind of new things that are in the budget. As I said, in 19, we focus on changes in our reporting. Other things that are new, we talked about the limited incorporation of proceeds from the county millage. We are going to spend almost the entire amount that's in there for pedestrian safety because of the compelling needs. I talked about $200,000 for the electronic speed signs. The rest go into street lighting. The affordable housing monies are not programmed this year. Part of the reason for that is we don't really know when we'll get those funds. The millage kicks in at the end of the year. It should be collected with your winter taxes, but it'll go through the county. It has to be redistributed. And I think we're just not sure the timing of when that money actually flows to the city. Public safety side, you can see some of the improvements that are there. The $125,000 reduction in general fund support of fire inspections is due to some increased scrutiny on that role of the city. We want to make sure that we're doing the right inspections at the right places, and by doing that, we're able to increase revenues and return over $125,000 to the general fund. So that's a good thing. Some realignments. Parks maintenance staff is going to go into parks. I'm a big believer in vertical responsibility. As I've told some of you before, it's the one throat to choke model. So if something goes wrong, I don't have to figure out who in the organization's responsible. I got one person to go to, and that's the head of the Parks Department, and we fix the problem. We're going to create the Sustainability and Innovation Office. We are doing interviews now. We have some wonderful candidates. Part of that is because of the reputation of the city. Part of it is that it's a very prominent position. And I hope that will get us back on track of being a leader in the area and not living on our laurels. We did award our first Sustainable Neighborhood Grant at the last 2 weeks. Thank you to Mr. Mirsky for holding us accountable to make sure we did that. That program, I hope to better market and really get neighborhoods enthused about taking responsibility, taking ownership, and doing things that improve quality of life in a sustainable way in their neighborhoods. We are looking at restructuring our solid waste and recycling service delivery. And we'll do that with the city's overhire program. So both the realignment of parks maintenance and the sustainability office doesn't require any new staffing. We're repurposing, redirecting, and realigning. On the transportation side, following again the one throat to choke model, all the transportation resources will be under the city engineer, so he can plan. That includes operation of the signals, it's the planning aspect, the capital maintenance, as well as the big projects. The only thing that remains out of there is the street crews who work in public works, because the mix of things that go on underneath the pavement require planning among different elements of public services. We are going to add focus on mobility systems. We're going to partner with, we have a partnership brewing with Deloitte, Ford, the City of Detroit, and actually the City of Ontario, of Windsor, Ontario, to look and see how we can use technology to enhance mobility. Again, there are no additional FTEs there, and we have hired a new transportation manager who is speeding on his way here from beautiful Las Vegas to take that job. We're going to reemphasize strategic planning and execution. As you can see there, rework our strategic plans. The bottom line there is to make sure that we can honestly answer the question, How do you know you're doing a good job? And how are we providing value to our taxpayers? Every budget is full of risks and uncertainties, and you can see those here. We are pretty well funded on our pension and other post-employment benefit requirements, but we still need to get over the hump on that. We are going to start treating state statutory revenue sharing as a non-recurring item. That's the part of the state shared revenues from sales taxes that's not constitutionally guaranteed, and it varies from year to year. As the state continues to experience its up and downs on revenue, that money becomes doubtful. So what we want to do at the recommendation of Tom Crawford, who's our CFO, let's treat that as non-recurring. We can put it into sinking funds. We can use it for things then that are important to us, but we don't count on it for our day-to-day operations. And I think that's a very prudent financial move, and I'm glad he brought it up. We don't know what's going to happen with water quality regulation at the state level. We've all heard about PFAS issues. I will tell you, we have no more lead in our system, but there is concern under the state, for potential state mandates under the lead and copper legislation, that we may actually have to go into people's homes up to the meter to take lead out. It's a big financial burden. It's problematic from a legal standpoint, but we need to be prepared for changes. We don't know in the future what we're going to have to regulate and test for either, so it's prudent to start putting money aside for that as well. Some uncertainties. We got our first two $5,000 checks this week for medical marijuana facilities. We don't know how much revenue we're going to get from that. There's $5,000 per application. We have about 30 applications in process, and there's a component of that that is part of the excise tax, where a portion of that 10% excise tax gets reallocated to entities that have facilities. And we don't know what that's going to be. And prudently, again, we don't count revenue until until we have a year's history. Recreational marijuana may or may not be on the November ballot as well. We may look at changing hours of enforcement for parking meters. We are going to change the fines. We're contractually required to do that with DDA when they adjust their permit fees. We're uncertain as to some funding sources, the key projects that are shown there. We need to look at the revenue streams related to our solid waste programmatic changes. And then finally, we are entering upon a process of establishing an asset management process for all the city-owned assets so we can plan out and program replacement. We can have a system that is more reliability focused rather than run to failure and then panic on how to fix it.
Yeah.
This is my favorite chart only because I made it. So it just describes the budget process. So I put it in there just because it validates the couple of hours I put into it. So let's talk about sustainability.
That was quick.
So let's talk about sustainability initiatives and projects. One of the things I am most excited about is the creation of the Office of Sustainability and Innovation. We're going to take those programs, we're going to assign measurable outcomes to them. We're going to make sure that we are forward-looking, and the innovation part of that is to make sure that we are always looking for new and better ways of doing things, that we are protective of the climate and our environment, and we are, again, leaders in the field, not followers. We're going through an update of our solid waste resource management plan, but we're not going to wait 9 months until it's done to make changes when the opportunities present themselves. One of the things that is of immediate concern that we'd like to address is alleyway maintenance. Progressive cities around the world turn their alleys into assets, not places where they dump their trash. I refuse to accept the crowning achievement of mankind as the dumpster, and we're going to make those alleyways an asset to our community, not a liability. I talked about the Sustaining Ann Arbor Neighborhood Grants Program. It's in the Climate Action Plan. We've actually got it launched, so we can mark that one off as not done but in place. I talked about transportation management and the water and sewer. One thing I'd like you to consider, just because it's on here doesn't mean it's a done deal. There are some benefits of potentially combining the Environmental and Energy Commissions into a Sustainability Commission. I know that's not new. It's been brought up in the past, but it may be helpful to look at that in terms of staff support and then that integration of both energy, climate action, all the things that are related. So I throw that up there for consideration and discussion during the following year. So let's talk about the Office of Sustainability and Innovation. You can see that there's essentially 4 programs there. There's the energy programs, environmental programs, and those are really some legacy things that we have, as well as things that I think are traditionally considered environmental. On the bottom, we have community engagement. The reason the resource management and solid waste is shown in an orange color is we need to work through how we're going to do it. So while the intent is to have it under Sustainability Office, we won't know that until we get some more information. This office will report to the Assistant City Administrator as well, so it'll be a direct link into the Administrator's office. I'm excited about this. I think it's long overdue, and given that we're putting resources into the efforts and we're seeking to return to a leadership position, this is an essential thing for us to do. Solid waste and recycling, I talked about a little bit. We are going to update the management plan. I really want to look at improved and coordinated collection. The collection should be about customer satisfaction and service, not complying with a fixed schedule. So that if the problem in downtown is when the driver shows up, if there's something blocking the dumpster doesn't get empty. You wind up with trash all over the ground, and we wind up with not only a black eye for the city, but a potential health problem. We want to make sure that it's outcome-based, not schedule-driven. And I would think we would add in a customer satisfaction component to an award or incentive fee that's part of that. I know organics and food waste management has been an issue. Councilmember Smith had tweaked my ear a little bit about going over to the school district to see if we can get them involved, and I have spoken to Superintendent Swift, so more to come on that. I want us to really have a good education program, and in the end, it's about providing customer service. And if you want, we can pause here for discussion, or I can wrap up, and then you can bombard me. Climate action, the county millage, as we talked about a little bit. Some potential uses. Council's passed, with your urging, a clean and renewable energy policy. So putting funding aside to achieve that is a potential use. Enhanced education encouragement. The Neighborhoods Microgrant Program, I hope to grow in popularity. I want to talk about some community solar programs, which has been a concern of the Energy Commission as well as the environmental. And Mr. Mirsky has thrown down the gauntlet to us to increase our volunteer programs, and he's given us some good examples that we can emulate. So those are some potential uses of the millage. In the coming year, as we have some money set aside for programming, I would hope, and I'm sure we will get some suggestions and some help from this commission on how to program those dollars. So, what's on your minds? What are you thinking? This is more of a forward-looking opportunity. The 19 budget has already been delivered. And again, I apologize for that, but as I said at the beginning, this is really about establishing the discipline of coming to the commission.
Are you thinking of asset management planning for roads?
We are, and we're actually further, excuse the pun, but further down the road on that. We have updated the asset condition assessment that was presented to council as an attachment to our mobility discussion with them in March. We have made some good progress in our arterials. We have retreated a little bit on our residential roads, but the goal is to get to 80% in good or better condition by 2023, and we're going to start doing that. This year, we will have a pretty aggressive capital maintenance program. You'll see crews out doing things like fog seals, cape seals, and I'm sure that we will get some concern as these approaches require a little bit of time to get in place, and my experience with them in the past is people don't like loose gravel until it's all set. So, but we are going to reseal the road so the water doesn't get into them and cause the potholes, and we are going to be much more aggressive. We are going to spend a fairly significant amount of money this year on our roads, about $22 million.
Very good.
How does the restructuring with the sustainability becoming its own department and potentially solid waste coming under that impact solid waste staffing. Because it seems like the current staff are overburdened, and we're asking them to do more and more.
Part of the, reworking the resource management plan is to look at, see how we do collection, and that's where most of the staff, I think you're talking about, lies. There's two ways to go. One is that we outsource, in which case the individuals who are in that area will be transferred into the public works, more of a public works function, maybe more road crews, maybe some other work. No one's going to lose his or her job over this. There are some positions we filled with temporary labor, and we're doing that because until we make the final decision, I don't want us to do anything that puts us past the point of no return. However, if we were to outsource, those jobs would be union jobs. They would be good-paying jobs, but they would be done externally from the city. So there is a little bit of added stress during the transition. We're going to try and work through that as quickly as we can. But I would reemphasize that no city employee is going to lose his or her job over the realignment.
And what about the program staff?
Program staff is, well, the program staff is not what it used to be honest. I think if we get ourselves into a position where we focus on education and encouragement, there may be the opportunity to expand the staff. If we do, as we do things by contract, we do need a strong contract management team in place. Those assets would come over. The program staff that exists doing energy work would come into the office and have the opportunity to expand their reach and work on other things as well.
Can I follow up on that specifically? We had a presentation from Preston Slaughton in December that provided a forecast for the professional side of staffing of solid waste, showing that it would go up to roughly 3.25 heads in fiscal year 18 and 19. Do you know if that's still the approximate number? Right, as far as I know, right now we have 2 staff people. We have Christina Gomes, and we have a new hire also. There was a job that was posted several months ago, and I think we just hired someone. But I think those are the only 2 people that are, other than communications, that are really working on solid waste issues. I don't know if, that's my recollection. I don't know if you can give us.
We had a open position where we used some of that funding rather than hire to fund the portion of the county's regionalization study. The intent would be to fill that position. Beyond that, I think the actual staffing level will be a result of the resource management plan. It's really about identifying, as we've talked about, the SMART goals. And I'll be honest with you, my intent with solid waste is to focus on 5 sets of outcomes. One is waste reduction, because with any issue, it's always better to do source reduction. It's the most cost-effective and practically effective. To focus on diversion, so that we wind up recycling more. And we've had a discovery lately of how we calculate diversion rates was not correct, so we fixed that. Doesn't make us feel better about ourselves, but at least we're doing it the right way. We want to focus on reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which really is a function of transportation of the materials. We want to look at cost efficiency and effectiveness, because we are custodians of the public trust in spending their money. And the last thing, with solid waste and everything else we're going to look at this year, we're going to put in a customer service, customer satisfaction component. So those are the 5 things we're going to focus on, and we will staff appropriately to get there. One thing that John has been vigilant about is making sure we're accurate in our financial reporting on the status of the solid waste fund. And that fund is not running out of money. It's healthy, but there is a little bit of a structural imbalance right now, mostly due to the increased costs we've experienced because we've had an interruption of service at the MuRF.
May I follow up on that
Please.
point? My understanding is that staff had engaged someone actually that spoke at a environmental commission meeting to look at whether or not the MuRF could be resurrected, so to speak. I don't know, there might be other entities looking into that. Can you give us an update on what might be happening there?
Sure.
And what the prospects are in terms of at least having an answer from a timing perspective?
I can share with something, a conversation I had this week with the leadership of Recycle Ann Arbor. They're going to give us a proposal in the next couple of weeks to reopen it as sort of a mini MuRF. My concern with them was the cost effectiveness of it, because from what I've read, MuRFs of any size right now are challenged. They think they can make a go of it. They think they can bring funding in to do the repairs, so we wouldn't have to pay for the fix. So obviously that perked my ears up, so I hope to get that within the next couple of weeks. Their feeling is they can get up and running in 6 weeks. I will remain cautiously skeptical about that, but I would certainly encourage their participation. The study the larger study we got was challenging in that we don't have the throughput by ourselves to operate a full-scale MuRF. So that's part of the reason behind the regionalization discussion. It's also a factor in the solid waste resource management plan update. But if, rather than wait another 9 months, if we have something that is viable, I know it's an important issue to people throughout our community. I'd like to address it as quickly as we can.
Is the conveyor belt at the MuRF fixed yet?
No, there are some, I guess the answer is the parts are on order to do that.
Still?
Yeah, I don't have the delivery date. I can find out. But, yeah, it's not, let me just be honest, it's not a satisfactory solution. Yeah, it's some special order equipment. We waited a long time to see if it was cost effective to fix it. And then when we ordered the parts, they're special order items. It just takes longer than any of us want to do. There are a lot of lessons learned from how not to do this in the future. But again, and that's part of what's driving up our monthly cost as well. So it'll get fixed sooner rather than later, I hope. And then we can look and see how to more efficiently use the whole facility.
Just to answer that, I think you provided us an update in early April.
I did.
That said that it was 4 to 6 weeks out.
Right.
So maybe sometime mid to end of May, hopefully at the latest.
Not always easy and not always kind to admit that you could have done things better, but we could have done things better.
Wonderful.
Councilperson Bannister?
Yes, not to change the subject from the
Oh,
MuRF.
please do.
Okay, there's a big meeting of the coalition for the remediation of Dioxane coming up on Tuesday. And I was wondering, do we have anything to report or update about the Dioxane plume or things budget related or anything on
It's
that?
not a budget issue for us, and I'll be careful here because there are parties involved in legal matters. I know that the city attorney's office has been meeting with representatives from the company that owns Gelman. And I think that's about probably all I can say about it. There's additional monitoring that's been discussed, extending the monitoring. Matt probably can add some detail if he feels comfortable doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a negotiation going on, and we can't say anything more because it's closed with the other parties. There is a card meeting, which is open to the public, which anyone's welcome to go to. And there'll be EPA has been engaged in this, and there's a gentleman, Michael Burkhoff, who occasionally comes to town and meets with interested parties. And that's a meeting that is scheduled in a couple of weeks, and I forget the date right offhand, but I can share that with folks. But I recommend any members of the public that are interested feel free to come to the Coalition for Action on Remediation of Dioxane, typically held at
Scioto Township Hall or?
Zebe Road, but at the county facility
Okay,
there.
right.
So, and you can reach out to me if you have any questions.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that because of the legal constraints, you can't get into more detail. But I'll share as I have in the past, the fact that the city attorney was able to get us a seat at the table is monumental in its impact. So kudos to the lawyers in the city for getting us there.
I think I heard you say early in your remarks that later this calendar year, we'd have the opportunity to make suggestions for fiscal year '20. Is that,
Yes.
what form is that going to take? Will someone from the administration come here to the commission? Or-
Hopefully by then, we'll have a fully engaged and powered-up sustainability officer who can come and seek that input. But I'm always, the budget is my responsibility. I'm always going to be engaged and interested.
Just to put the bug in your ear then, I've been hoping since I've been on the commission to get some regular funding for monitoring of the water quality in the Huron River impoundments. I think that's really important, and we even passed a resolution at one point that I don't think really went anywhere, but that's something I'd really like to see going forward.
I think we are, though, because it relates to some of the contaminants of concern that have arisen. I think if we're guilty of anything, we probably haven't communicated those efforts as well. And we can get, our water and wastewater directors up here and talk about what their efforts are. We, last week, in fact, the Citizens Academy toured the water treatment plant, and they were presented with some of that information. So I'll get a hold of Brian and see if I can get him up here before that to come and give you an overview of the water quality issues that we're concerned about.
Good idea.
I had a couple of questions and a few comments. Going back to your early slides, where you talked about revenue and expenses. Previously, we had been informed that there was sort of a scissors effect between revenue and expenses. You indicated that revenue is up 1.6.2%, but I don't think you gave us a figure for expenses. And I'm wondering how,
The expenditures generally go up around 2.5%.
So there still is that issue with
Structural.
expenses increasing, going up faster than revenue.
Right, and that's primarily labor-driven.
Right.
Our labor is probably 75-80% of our total cost each year, other than transfers. And there's not a lot we can do since a large part of that, 2/3 of our workforce are covered by union agreements. And so we have to program those. But remember, we have to balance the budget every year, so we'll make the adjustments. And we don't count new revenues until we have the experience. A small example would be, we could get as much as $200,000 this year in unanticipated revenues from marijuana licensing. Right. We don't know that. We don't count that. When you drive around town, you see there are a lot of new units under construction. We don't count that revenue until we have the operating experience. But part of the goal for next year, just to be really clear, is we want to look and see how we do business and make sure we are being as efficient as we can to provide value.
If I may, I wanted to elaborate on a couple things that you said. First of all, since this is a public forum, I wanted to mention that the Sustaining Ann Arbor Together Neighborhood Grants Program is funded with $100,000 in this year and next year's budget. You mentioned we've approved and issued the first grant. My recollection is that it was only about $10,000. So this is basically a message to everyone watching, listening, whatever, to think about what could be done as a program to enhance your neighborhood, and to maybe work with commissioners or city council people to proceed with that. There is a webpage on the city's site now under the title Sustainable Ann Arbor. So I would encourage anyone individually or in groups to consider doing something to use that money in a positive way to enhance the community.
John, would you mention what got the award? I think that might help get
Yes.
some of the juices flowing with the folks.
That's a good idea. So yes, the first grant is a composting pilot that will take place in the 5th Ward. The intent is to do a lot of education about, composting is, what the intent is to increase the diversion rate, primarily through additional increases in organics composting. And there'll be a lot of education and outreach, and in addition to that, there's going to be if you will, stickers put on the brown composting cart that are similar to the ones that we have on our recycling cart, so that there is a reminder and some details about what can and cannot be composted, so that anytime someone puts out their compost cart, they're reminded, aha, we can put these kinds of organics in there, whether it's yard waste, whether it's food waste, and particularly we're hoping that there will be an increase, a big increase in food waste composting. And there's going to be data collected before the pilot and then after the pilot to understand how successful it was, and hopefully how it can be then improved and rolled out potentially on a citywide basis with these stickers. A lot of volunteer work is being put in by 2 organizations. So those are the kinds of ideas, to Councilman Smith's point, that we're looking for, whether it's enhancements through rain gardens and things like that. Anything that's on, I think, help me, Administrator Lazarus, anything that's on public property or school property, right? It's not private property.
That's correct.
But, so basically city property or public school property.
So, part of the messaging of sustainability is also the equity component. And my experience with microgrant programs is one of the best benefits is neighbors get to talk to each other, they get to know each other, they further take pride and invest in their neighborhoods, and that contributes to many things, including safety as well as sustainability programs. So we've written the rules to be as expansive as they can be and as inclusive as they can be, and it can include a neighborhood or community group is pretty well defined by what the applicants say it is. We really want to get those small projects that tend to fall between the cracks that make a difference in the quality of life that funded, and by neighbors putting in the sweat equity to execute, I know that they'll take care of those improvements because they own them since they worked on them.
Sorry, but I'd like to make one other plug, a short one, and that is, you mentioned a number of possible uses of the funding coming from the millage for climate action. One of the things that we're looking at, and Matt, if you want to, you can elaborate on it, may not be necessary, but one of the key things that we're looking at is energy efficiency programs. I don't think that was on your list. And one of the main targets that we have with that is looking at the equity side, recognizing that utility costs are a much higher percent of disposable income for lower income residents of the city, that we would look at energy efficiency and also deploying of solar, particularly targeted towards low income housing and lower income residents. So we're developing programs. Matt and his group, Josh and Emily, are working with third parties to look at best practices and deploy those here in Ann Arbor.
For those of you who don't know, Mr. Mirsky has volunteered his time to work with me on programs, and for that he gets the really nice title of executive advisor. He gets a really cool business card and absolutely no compensation.
That's more than enough.
Changing track just a little, I'm a big fan of pedestrian safety, and I'm a big fan of bicycle circulation in the city, but I'm wondering if perhaps the balance of things between people who drive in our fair town, who probably are quite a ways, the majority of people, are really well represented in the policy discussions about how and what happens in down to the detail level. For example, I saw an idea floated about putting parking along Huron Street through downtown here. Anybody who drives understands that we have 2 east-west roads, this one being by far the most important, and therefore, because there are only 2, the most important roadway for motor vehicles in the city. It needs to flow. To put parking on this street is nuts, forgive me. Something's missing, I think, in the policy discussion that represents drivers who really do use these roads. It's certainly all of the people who come into town during the day, and it's a lot of us who live here too. maybe you can look at wherever you're getting this policy advice and maybe get it balanced a little better.
So if I could, let me answer that question specifically first, then more generally. The project to streetscape you're on is being done with the DDA.
Yep.
We have had distinguished traffic engineers evaluate traffic based on time of day. The goal is to have 4 lanes of traffic during the morning and afternoon peak, but during the rest of the day, on weekends and overnight, we can add a parking lane. So we are essentially managing the real estate and the right-of-way more efficiently and realizing that it serves different functions, different times of day, and different days of the week. I think that accommodates those who, because we don't want to choke off access to the downtown either, so we want to make sure people can get down here, they can linger and spend time, but during the rush hour, we need to make sure that there's adequate capacity. There is discussion about providing more priority for transit as well. But right now, that project recognizes that during certain parts of the day, there has to be additional traffic. That project provides a left turn lane from Huron onto Fifth Avenue, which is a major backlog. That's an enhancement. We looked at all the crash data, both vehicular and by bike ped, when we looked at the improvements to be made. And we're going to try and see if we can extend that use of the lanes all the way down to State, because right now it stops at Division. So I think hopefully that can set your mind at ease a little bit that that project is not going to adversely impact people who need to get in and out of town during the morning and afternoon peak periods. More broadly, we need to look at mobility. We have initiatives that we are looking at with some external partners to see how we can use technology better to enhance moving people, not just cars. Council approved a couple of months ago a mobility study for the Lower Town area and the approaches in and out of that area to see how we can better use those assets. There are concerns, and I think next Monday or next Tuesday, those who want to come and sit in the Planning Commission can enjoy a long evening, because there are some developments along Pontiac Trail that'll be considered, where there are a lot of concerns on traffic. When you look at the intersection of Barton and Pontiac Trail, there's a real conflict between kids going to school and traffic. If you look at the counts of pedestrians crossing Fuller Road at Maiden Lane, we have over 1,000 people crossing the street. There's no way to address that other than maybe looking at grade separation. So when I talk about one throat to choke with Mr. Hutchinson, he's got a pretty big task ahead of him in terms of balancing the different needs. My personal opinion is that congestion is the #1 detriment to quality of life in this community. It's what leads to aggressive driving, which is a big safety problem for us. We have to acknowledge that we have a net migration in and out each day of 80,000 plus people. We have to manage our road network efficiently. We're not going to build more lanes, and there are those who would argue that building more lanes only induces more congestion. But we do need to manage and operate the intersections better. We need to look and see how transit can be more reliable, cost-effective, and have a better user quality as well. So those are the challenges that we face. And the last thing I'll tell you is when people tend to look and want to blame people who don't live here for the problems, more than half the tickets the police department issues, if you count students, probably 3/4 are people who live here. So it's not people who don't live here not respecting our neighborhoods, not respecting our rules. And the old expression is, we've met the enemy and it is us.
So I still repeat my point of view that the balance in the discussion sometimes seems to completely favor things other than moving cars. And I, in every one of those circumstances you talked about, except maybe this one, I completely agree with you. But I'm one balancing thing that would happen if this is one lane through this corridor is a very good traffic light timing system, so that you do not stop at every light and can't pass, can't get around people waiting to turn left, et
That's been
cetera.
part of the project planning as well. But again, I just want to reemphasize that during the morning and afternoon peak rush hours, It will be a 4-lane roadway.
I do my best not to drive out here during those hours. I'm talking about the rest of them. I don't care about 2 in the morning or Sunday morning, but during the day, this gets really clogged up often.
I agree. I understand, and your point is well taken.
Okay, thank you.
I would be remiss if I didn't speak up for the Main Street Area Association businesses and in Ward 1. And they, I noticed we had that slide about one of the uncertainties is possibly parking enforcement after 6 p.m. And
Yeah,
the Main Street
that's
Area
another
Association
bad idea.
businesses are quite vocal and adamant that that would be harmful to
Yes.
their businesses. And
Really
I
not
heard
fancy.
also from a bunch of my Ward 1 folks that they also appreciate that there's not parking fees after 6, under the idea that we're trying to make downtown a fun destination to just come and not have to worry about paying a big parking bill. So that's more of a comment than a question, unless you have something to add to it.
We're going to have a process that has a lot of engagement over the summer months. We have a required meeting by contract, joint meeting of council and DDA in October, and we hope to present the information there and get the guidance on where to go with it. But it would be remiss of us not to consider the optimal management scheme for a very valuable city resource, which is on-street parking.
Any other questions, comments?
Thank you.
Could you explain how the Natural Areas Preservation Group fits into your environmental slide in terms of your kind of pieces
Thank
of
you.
the pie? Because personally, I consider them as part of that matrix, and I'm just wondering how you see them fitting. And additionally, I think that they're an interesting model for relatively few paid positions, leveraging hundreds and hundreds of citizen volunteers to be able to get very good work done in this city.
Well, the Parks Department as a whole with their Give 365 program leverages close to a dozen full-time equivalents each year, which is tremendous effort. Many of them work in the natural areas. The natural area preservation staff lies within the Parks Department. I think that's appropriate. Their role over the coming years will be a little expanded because that's where our wildlife and management program will fit in with their larger mission. So something that has been a little bit, what's the right word? It's stirred a lot of emotion in the community, which is the deer management program, will migrate after next year, in the coming year, to the natural area preservation. And I think they'll be able to achieve balance between protection of the city's forests, its natural areas, and address the population of all the wildlife in a humane manner. So I like it in the Parks Department. I think that falls into the category, if it's not broken, don't fix it.
Okay.
I appreciate your time this evening. This kind of exchange is extremely valuable, and it's really why our boards and commissions exist. So I appreciate the feedback. I look forward to having staff come back over the coming months, after we all have hopefully an enjoyable summer, and really dig into the next 2-year budget cycle. So thank you for your time this evening.
We appreciate yours.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I add one more?
Oh, gosh.
Before we go, I know we're charging forward with redirecting the public mental health village to the pedestrian safety and climate action and affordable housing. And just before we dive into that conversation, while you're still here, do you have anything, is there any update about the legalities of the city council by memo correcting what the ballot language had said about not mentioning?
I'm going to leave that conversation up to the city attorney,
Okay.
because I would not want to mislead the commission or make a statement that's false. Things that go on the council agenda are reviewed by the city attorney. So the council did provide publicly what its intent was on the monies to be returned to the city prior to the millage election. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
All right, we have a resolution to consider this evening. Councilperson Smith, would you please introduce it?
Segues pretty nicely. I just thought it was appropriate, considering the timing of budget discussions and the discussion about the use of the public safety rebate that comes from the fact that we fund our own police department. As everybody here knows, the council voted last July 4th to recommend how we would allocate our share of our rebate that we were provided as a part of this. The millage passed by a fairly comfortable margin in November. I thought it was appropriate, since this body didn't have time to provide a formal recommendation in July, to reaffirm the allocation of these funds, particularly in light of the fact that this body, in my 2.5 years on it, has continually made recommendations to city council and city administrators on funding positions and programs. This is our first real opportunity for recurring funding to provide some of what I think all of us have agreed is an essential need to implement much of our climate action plan. And so I've introduced this resolution for our discussion this evening. I don't imagine everybody will support it, but if not, I'd be very curious to hear suggestions about where this recurring funding can come from. So in that spirit, you have the language of the resolution in front of you. I don't think I need to read the whole thing, do I, Allison?
I could just read the resolve for members of the
Great.
public on TV.
Do we need to
Um,
make an amendment?
Yeah, I think we would change therefore to the word resolved. But then resolve, the Environmental Commission recommends that the Ann Arbor City Council uphold Resolution R 17261 and allocate 40% of the public safety rebate to fund programs to affect the goals of the Climate Action Plan.
Is there any discussion?
I think do we need a motion first and then?
Yeah, I'll move the resolution.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, is there a second?
We got the second?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, sorry. All in favor?
No,
Well, let's-
discussion.
Okay. I did this last time too. My notes are backwards. All right, is there a discussion?
Could I just get a clarification about the history of this? Did we vote on, did we pass a resolution that supported reallocating those monies at one point in the past?
This body did not. What happened was last summer it was introduced, and we did not have a regular meeting before the county board would have to make their decision about whether this was going to be on the ballot and in what form. Council judged it to be an important consideration for our voters, to have them understand what our intent was for that public safety rebate. The county was very particular in making the sausage, as I point out in the resolution. The ballot language allocated 38% of the revenues, which is approximately $15 million a year. 38% of that would go to the county's community mental health department for mental health crisis stabilization and prevention, and to meet mental health needs in an appropriate setting. 38% would be allocated to the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office to ensure continued operations and increased collaboration with the mental health community. And 24% of that would be allocated as a rebate back to the 9 communities that fund their own public safety force. And because that was in discussion last July, we thought it important as city council to provide guidance on how we would use that, because the townships and communities in Washtenaw County that don't have their own public safety force, that's subsidizing their sheriff's department road patrols. That's why it's coming back to all of those jurisdictions.
Any other discussion?
But we did have lengthy discussion, did we not? Yeah. And the council did vote the resolution?
Yeah, but there's some discussion among elements of the community and council to change that. I'd like to just mention a few things, if I may. First of all, I think there's an impression in the community that funds are being diverted from mental health to climate action. And if you listen closely to what Councilman Smith said, that's not the case. So actually, all of the funding in the millage that was intended for mental health and for the sheriff's office is indeed flowing to those intended uses. It's only the portion of the millage that covers expenses that Ann Arbor already has in place. We already fund those programs. That the question is, at the time, how is the city going to use them? And council at the time said, we think it's appropriate that citizens know how that's going to be spent. And I speak, I think, also for the Energy Commission, because the Energy Commission has also discussed this at length. The Climate Action Plan was passed unanimously by council in 2012. Since then, there has been virtually no funding for climate action programs. There's been roughly, I think it was $60-some thousand for a couple of years, and then that was increased to $130-some thousand. But most of that money was spent for the 2 seasonal employees, those were Emily and Josh. And then there was a little bit of money spent last year for the Ann Arbor Solar Club program that frankly was not as successful. We learned, as was what we wanted, we learned some lessons, and we're working on a replacement program for that. But the Climate Action Plan outlined 84 actions. The Climate Action Plan stated that in order to meet the 2025 goals, all 84 of those actions would have to be implemented, and none of those programs has really been tackled. And so the rationale, I think, behind council, and certainly among those of us in the Energy Commission, was we supported the use of those millage funds for climate action because of the commitment that the city had made to work on these actions, but actually no work had really been done. Now, I will grant you, just to be objective, the city did meet its 2015 climate action target. It did so for basically 2 reasons only. There was a state mandate that the utilities increase their renewables, and DTE met that mandate. The other big reason was that at the time, the old Pfizer property was a part of the city of Ann Arbor's greenhouse gas emissions tally. It was a part of our inventory. Thank you. Since then, that property was sold to the University of Michigan, so all of the emissions from that property were transferred from Ann Arbor's emissions to the university emissions, and it made Ann Arbor look good. So really, in terms of what Ann Arbor did to achieve the 2015 goal, as I said before, it's not because we implemented 20 or 40 of the 84 actions. It was really that those 2 other things happened. In order to be able to make progress going forward, we need community-facing programs like the ones that Howard mentioned, like the ones that I talked about, and in order to do that, we need funding. And We believe that this is an appropriate use of the funds. We believe that it will also reflect the values of the city and its residents, not only relative to climate action, but also, as I pointed out, we recognize that we recognize that low-income people are most negatively affected by high utility rates, and therefore we want to help with energy efficiency programs as well as renewable energy for those types of households. And I would only add, for anyone in the city of Ann Arbor that's paying any attention to the news, climate action is really necessary because climate change is dead serious. Almost all the forecasts are being, in terms of the consequences of climate change, are worse than what models, as bad, if not worse than models have forecasted. I'll leave it at that.
Any other discussion?
Well, yes. I agree with the seriousness and the logic behind everything that you just said. And council is, as Mr. Lazarus mentioned, working on our budget. And we've got a big binder, and we are going through all that, and we'll meet on May 7th and May 21, and I will be looking for money for these climate action initiatives. In addition to this environmental commission, I also serve on the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board, and they passed a similar resolution to this one that we're doing for their 40%. But they were talking about how housing is at least related more directly in their minds to mental health. Because a lot of folks, and I'm 5 months into council, I'm representing my Award 1 folks as much as possible. And a lot of them were concerned that back in July 3rd, when council passed this, people weren't aware that that millage vote in November would be not for mental health. And I think, so the Housing Human Service Advisory Board, which I also serve on, would like for it to go to low-income housing and mental health. And then another board that I serve on through council is the City and Council Community Corrections Advisory Board. And their fiscal year is 6 months from October 1st through March 31st is the first 6 months. And they have already, due to an increase in mental health needs, have already in many of their categories expended a lot of their projected annual budget because of an increase in the mental health. And so I attended my first meeting of that here in April, and I asked the board members and if they needed more money. And and they were pretty much informally unanimous that they did need mental health money related to more money for what they're experiencing. And they were, and at least one of those board members, lastly, was not aware that the mental health millage money in Ann Arbor was going to these other purposes. So we corrected him during that meeting. So my role as a Ward 1 council person is to amplify these voices, and I will be looking for money for the seriousness of these climate action goals, but I do have serious reservations about correcting the ballot language through a city council resolution.
I just, that's factually incorrect. I mean, what I've read and what's in the resolution is the ballot language in how they allocated these things.
Yes.
You know, that's just what the people voted on. You went into the voting booth and it told you how it was going to be allocated. That's taken directly from the ballot language
Yes.
on Washtenaw County's website. This is not the 38, 24%, and what it's being used for is directly from the ballot issue language that people voted on.
True, but then the 40-40-20 was not mentioned anywhere in the jumbo postcards or on the ballot.
I would disagree with that, because this body discussed that 40-40-20 ratio, and council discussed that same ratio as well,
But that,
long before
that's
the
only of
ballot
these two,
language
isn't it?
came to pass.
It's not of that one.
You know, so I feel like this was due diligence on the part of both
These
this
numbers
commission
come out of those
and
two.
on the part of city council before we voted on this and decided what had happened. So as a voter, I feel like I was very well informed in what I was voting on. And as a citizen of Ann Arbor, I also feel like I was very well informed on what this rebate money would go toward. You may have a difference of opinion on that, but that's the progression of events that happened here. And that's what I, as a voter in Ann Arbor, voted on when I voted for this particular ballot measure. And I also feel like the commitment that this council, that this body made toward applying those funds has also been clear to the public as part of this entire process.
I think there's some confusion about the percentages. The first batch of percentages on the resolution is the ballot language from the county. Only money from the third, only money from the 24% number is going into what Ann Arbor's doing. The percentages and numbers down below are not replacing those three things up top. It's
Right.
just how to spend money that would, if we followed the guidelines of the county, go strictly to our police on climate action and other things. It has nothing to do with mental health spending in the county. That stays, we're not changing the basic parameters of county millage, except for we don't need the money for our police. We're going to use it for something else.
This is exactly what Councilman Smith said.
Exactly.
Is that when people went to the ballot box, they voted on something that said the 38% of the millage will go to mental health.
And it is.
That 38% will go to mental health. When they went to the ballot box, they saw that 38% would go to the sheriff's office. That 38% will go to the sheriff's office. They saw that 24% will go to policing. Ann Arbor has its own police force. City council made it clear, was it clear to both the Energy Environmental Commission and anyone that was paying attention to what city was doing before this, including massive emails that went out from the Ecology Center and other groups saying, vote for this, because the 24% for policing for Ann Arbor, as well as is mentioned here, Chelsea, Milan, Saline, Ypsilanti, those jurisdictions, those municipalities already do their policing. And so the council made it clear to its residents, since you're going to be voting on this, and we don't need additional money for policing, we do this already, we want you to know how you're going to spend this money. And this is how we intend to spend it. And I would only add, you, Councilman Bannister, you may vote your conscience, and you represent various constituencies. I would ask you, what is going to be your legacy? And I say, my opinion is, I'll tell you, the only reason why I am working on the Energy Commission, the Environmental Commission, and serving the administrator is really because of climate action. And I want my legacy to be that I tell my kids and my grandkids that I worked so that my generation didn't ruin this world for you. And I would ask you to think when you vote tonight, but more importantly, for the final budget, are we going to fund something the city said we will do unanimously in 2012 and has yet to live up to its commitment? It is living up to every commitment it has made to mental health. It is not living up to its commitment relative to climate action.
Yeah,
And we have young people in the in the audience, and they will be living with the consequences of our decisions.
Yeah, I agree. I'm supporting the resolution for two reasons, which have already been stated, so I'll try to be brief. But for one, we need the climate funding, and we don't have another source for it. And two, the council was very clear ahead of the vote how they were going to use the money if the vote passed. As a voter, I considered that a promise from the council, and for the council to go back on it now would be a violation of that promise. I voted yes because of this division, the 40-40-20.
Yes, I didn't expect to hear anything else from you guys tonight coming into this meeting. And I just would like to say, though, that under the 40-40-20, that was not on the ballot. And I can bring that up on my laptop and
Sure.
send the ballot language if anyone needs to see that.
That's clear.
That was clear to you,
Yes.
but was it clear?
It was clear that it was not on the ballot. It's
Okay.
clear why I voted as I did, because I had taken into account council's intent to spend it 40-40-20. And I think a lot of other people did. I know there is some polling that has been done with some language that I would say is somewhat leading, that where majority of respondents said that they were unaware. I would say if they were unaware, I don't believe that that's necessarily representative of the community at large. It's certainly not representative people that were paying attention to what these commissions were doing up until the time of the millage, and certainly what city council voted on.
And I would ask Councilwoman Bannister, were you aware that this body also discussed that 40-40-20 and that city council discussed that 40-40-20? Because that was discussed in public bodies.
I was, I believe, sort of flabbergasted of that July vote. And then I think that many people were surprised in November when it did pass. And I think the reason why, or many of the speculation on why it did pass in November was because we were having more of the mental health shootings, where, you know, people weren't all around the country, where different mentally ill people were committing crimes, and it was dangerous. So I think that was part of the reason why the voter came to the voting booth, read that it was for mental health, didn't see anything about the 40-40-20, and so that was how that it passed. So I think I have definitely heard from a lot of different people, including those two separate commissions boards that I serve on, that people are surprised that just because the Ecology Center sent out onto its listserv and that you all were aware,
So
I've heard enough.
I have a question, council member. Are you then advocating that the roughly $2 million that the city's gonna get back as a result of the public safety rebate, which just goes in the general fund, be then reprogrammed back to the county for mental health services? Is that what you're advocating?
Well, I think what we would need to do is have more further discussions if that were to come to
Because,
pass.
you know, as I look at what's happening in the other communities that are getting the public safety rebate, I don't see a discussion of turning that rebate back to the county for mental health issues, that they are using that in their general fund, and just using that to supplement their regular operating budgets. I continue to believe, and I know you disagree with me, that our intent that we passed as council last July provided a fair barometer and, as Mr. Mirsky said, a promise to the voters of how we were going to use that money. And it encouraged significant campaigning in the environmental community to help pass this millage. And I think that that was important. That's why the county put it together this way. Because certainly this millage doesn't pass without a rebate. Because we in Ann Arbor are not going to pay additional tax money to supplement out-county road patrols. It's that simple. We already pay for police. We're not going to pay for other people's police. I don't think that this, and I think if you would talk to Commissioner LaBarre, who's the one who pulled this together, I think he would agree that, you know, it was split up like this and it showed the sausage making so that it could pass, so that this money would come in. And I think that the resolution of intent that we passed at council was essential to that effort.
I want to speak up one more time, sorry. I'd like to point out, you're new on council. So in fiscal year 18, when the budget was being considered, basically 2 years before what's going on right now, there were a group of people from the Environmental Commission, the Energy Commission, and the Ann Arbor Partnership that put together a proposal asking for roughly $1 to $1.25 million for climate action, because there had been no funding for climate action, because the city had made a commitment. There were no additional funds approved per that 1 million roughly request. So you said you're going to look for climate funding. There is no place in the budget for climate funding. We've already been through this before. It was looked at when we brought that proposal at the time. Council said there is no money for climate funding. We cannot take 2% from every single budget and try to do something. The council said there's no money for climate funding. That is one of the reasons why, when the millage came up, and we saw that 24% of that funding was going to be available for some use, council said, what are the areas where we have been making consistent promises to the community where that has been underfunded? And those were climate action, it's affordable housing, and it's pedestrian safety, also including biking and things like that, where those kinds of people are using those same kinds of assets. Because council had failed to come up with any funds before, because in prior years, in 2013, 14, 15, etc., basically no money was being spent. So I think it's important that you understand the background. I think everyone here, and everyone that certainly voted for this for the climate funding reason, is sympathetic to the mental health issues of the community and the country as a whole. But as I said before, to me, this is not an existential threat for the globe. It is a huge problem, but I think certainly the federal government is not stepping up. And poor communities like wherever, I won't mention names, but we know where they are, and they're all across the country and across the globe. They're depending on cities like Ann Arbor to lead the way and show this is the way to do it, and then we'll copy your programs and maybe we'll have a chance. But right now, the Paris Climate Accord and the commitments that were met are they're not on track to meet those. So it's potentially very serious. I'm done.
Thank you.
All right. Is there a motion to consider the question of adopting the resolution?
So moved.
Do we have to say as amended?
Well, the only thing we're changing is the resolved from therefore.
And technically, the council to commission, so
Yep,
as amended.
yes.
As amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
I think I'll stick with my no on that, thank you.
The motion carries.
Yeah, you had 8
All right, moving on, the next item on the agenda, report from committees and
This is the
chair.
resolution.
Do we have an
very
update from
precise.
the metrics committee?
That was the resolution.
Are there any
From council.
other?
Yes, right.
Very
No,
good.
other than Josh, we've been working with staff on some additional details on metrics, and as we get that data in, we'll be prepared to share that with you.
Okay. Any other committees with updates?
Yeah, pollinator subcommittee. We have our website up and available for everybody. We have put out an article in the Natural Area Preservation newsletter as well. And we're working on materials to distribute at events like the Mayor's Green Fair in June. And we're working on getting the word out about the importance of pollinators through local media and other news outlets. And, or not news outlets, but print materials. And we had a feature in the Current magazine under the Green Corner, thanks to Matt for setting that
If
up.
there are any other good green ideas, Current is looking for ideas, so please share them with me, and I'm happy to share them with them. So
Would you like to read the website URL so the public can access? Okay.
is it
Next
on the
time.
Natural Area Preservation website?
It's on the Natural Area Preservation website.
Yeah, so anyone-
Just search pollinators and it'll come up.
Go to the nra2gov.org website, search pollinators, and it'll pop up.
Very good.
All right. Updates from other commissions. Commissioner Mursky, do you have an update on Energy
So
Commission?
I've already talked about several things that we're working on, so I will repeat that. Energy efficiency and the solar club replacement, which would be solar and energy efficiency. Other energy efficiency community-facing programs, we're working on detailing those out. Just two other things, and that is just of general interest, I think, to the public. First of all, Nate Geisler, who served the Energy Commission, has resigned from the city. He's going to be working for the university for the SEAS school, the sustainability school. So he's already left the city, and I think he starts May 1st or sometime
Monday.
around then. Monday, yep. And one other point of interest, the MPSC votes tomorrow on whether or not to approve DTE's petition for a new 1,100 megawatt natural gas plant. The Energy Commission passed a resolution against that plant, saying that energy efficiency and a mix of renewables and other actions could potentially either delay that plant or make it unnecessary. If that plant goes in, then that will be a fixed asset that will be burning natural gas and emitting CO2 for the next, most likely, 40 to 50 years. So that it will be a very interesting decision that the MPSC renders tomorrow. Other than that, nothing else from the commission.
Commissioner
Any
Gibrandal,
predictions?
do you have an
We
update from
just
planning?
had our annual retreat, and so did a whole exercise in prioritizing what we wanted to work on this year. And one of the huge opportunities is because we just passed the new Zorro code where we kind of unified everything and reorganized, kept the content the same. We are also looking at where code may shift and change and evolve as kind of the 2.0 version. And so we're going to be looking at that, and as we were prioritizing things, I would say that sustainability goals were a big piece of that, and I think stay tuned for further discussion on trying to maximize opportunities for developers to be able to demonstrate their sustainability goals through solar and other things. Right now, it feels like there's some kind of token things that are done, and I think the commission is keen to be able to make those more robust. It's interesting, actually, some of the things that we talked about actually align very much with the 40-20-40, because sustainability and affordability were a big piece, as well as transit and mobility. So interesting how that all kind of aligned at the same time, so. And a lot of medical marijuana, so it just, every meeting, we have at least 5. So Mr. Lazarus will be happy with that as our funding sources. Right, I know, that's right.
Commissioner Apple, do you have an update for Parks Commission?
Parks Department is hiring over 200 positions for the summertime. Other than that, great presentation from some of the sustainability initiatives that are going on at the golf courses. They've really done some beautiful work up there, particularly in regards to some of the stream work and pollinator habitat that they've done up at Leslie Park. I always get it wrong, I call it Traver, but yeah, it's Leslie Park. That used to be a ditch that ran through the center of that golf course, and it was unappealing, and it flooded year after year. With grants from the county, they've turned it into a meandering stream that floods seasonally and makes incredible butterfly and pollinator habitat and a much more interesting golf course to boot. So I just like to call out other departments here when they are sort of doing the right thing in terms of sustainability issues. And it certainly seems like the golf course folks are doing that.
Great,
That's
thank
all.
you.
Very good.
Report from council, Councilperson Smith or Bannister, do you have updates?
We've been having a lot of meetings lately about the litigation and negotiations related to the Y-Lot, but those are in closed session because they are privileged and confidential.
Anything else?
Not on a council topic, but Mr. Nod and I were at a conference sponsored by the Michigan Association of Planning today, where Matt represented the city, talking about resilience, participation in the USDN network, and the great work that he and his staff have been doing here. But it was, I think, for those of us in the audience, a very timely discussion of how resilience means taking these concepts of sustainability and plugging them into how we run the city on a day-to-day basis, so that we're not bickering about annual funding, that we are building these things into the foundation of how the city runs. We're not even close to being there yet, and we're way farther along than most municipalities are. I think, we have these discussions about funding, and everybody is scrambling for these funds, but this is what being able to use these dollars in an effective manner to institutionalize and codify sustainable and resilient practices, social equity, disaster preparedness, is critical. And I am very proud of the work that this commission has done, but I just wanted to give Matt a little bit of a shout out for the great work that he's done and the great presentation he gave today.
You're here.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, would you like to give a staff report?
Sure. You guys stole my thunder. I was going to tell you about Nate leaving and then our map presentation. No, it was a good day. I was fortunate to be on a panel with the new sustainability director from Grand Rapids, and there's a ton of good work going on there. Joel Harani-Harris from Detroit, the first sustainability director there. And of all places, Grand Haven Township. And there is a ton of good stuff going on in the township. So it was a really diverse panel. But I think to Commissioner Mirsky's point, Dr. Andreessen, who's the state climatologist, got up and shared the latest climate data. And if you thought it was bad, it's worse. That numbers where you were thinking about 3 to 6 degrees increase in temperature by 2070, they're pretty sure it's going to be double digits. So kind of all the science, and these are, state climatologists, MSU. So it kind of spoke to this, there's a lot of work that's going on in adaptation. We're fortunate we have a stormwater utility that's stable funding for one of the biggest threats that we're facing, which is more precipitation, which we've measured, 44%, more extreme storms. And we know there's more high heat coming our way. And I think back to the millage funding, I think a lot of that is focused on our mitigation work, which is more energy efficiency and more renewable energy. And so those are the two pieces that we're working on. And again, with stormwater and the kind of our climate adaptation work, that's about $9 million a year that we have stable funding to work on that. And it's that other, I've shown that slide of the big M with the gray area that we really don't have money to help residents, businesses, the neediest and more vulnerable in our community lower their energy bills and have more of that energy come from renewables. So I also spoke to the Housing and Human Services Advisory Board. Teresa Gelati asked me to speak and just shared, because I think there's not as much of a understanding of the clear linkage between energy and the poor and vulnerable in the community. And the example I used was I have a brother-in-law who's passed, but he had fully disabled and had subsidized housing in Ipsy. And his rent was $150 a month, and his energy budget was $150 a month. So I think of that as paying my mortgage in utilities, and what that means to poor folks in our community. So anyway, a couple other things. John didn't mention, but there was a full-day energy day at the University of Michigan, where the university's looking at where it sits compared to other universities, and it's not as good as it probably could be. But students gave some great presentations, faculty spoke, 140 invite only there, and really looking at ways the university could step up and maybe look to be carbon neutral. Jerry Hancock was also at the meeting today talking about the community rating system, which is a way that you go to FEMA and you tell them all the things you're doing around stormwater, floodplain management. Jerry's been able to get us into this system and get us a rating of 6 now that we have a brand new hazard mitigation plan that's been approved by FEMA. And what that means in practical terms is any resident who's got flood insurance gets a 20% discount now, which is, it used to be 15, Jerry's now got it to 20. So this is, again, real work on stormwater flooding in the community, steps that we're taking, but making it cheaper for people who are in those areas to buy insurance. Since Nate's gone, I'll touch a little bit on some of the energy stuff. We're going to hear back from Honeywell. We've done audits in 13 of the biggest facilities, so like Vets Park with the pools and the ice rinks, fire stations, looking at ways we can continue to invest not only in energy efficiency in those spaces, but renewable energy. Working with the DDA as part of the rebuild on 5th Street, there's an opportunity to partner with DTE on 3 fast charging stations on 5th, probably the 3 spots just north of Ann. So this is really DDA leading this, but it's city staff are helping out with that. I checked with Crescent, and I think there was an update that we shared with you, but just for the public, there is a new solid waste plan that's being initiated, and that there's a clear recognition of engaging the Environmental Commission early on in that process. So I expect to hear from Crescent in the near future. And as we look to a big renewable energy build, the landfill is one of the key places we could go. Probably 20 megawatts maybe we could install there. One of the things that's happened, though, is because we have natural air preservation folks and an ornithologist, is they recognized 20 years ago that there were some state-listed birds, bobolinks. They're not endangered, but they're rarer, and they breed in grassland. And so we actually petitioned DEQ to say, we'd like to not mow the top of our landfill to create habitat for these birds. Well, now there's several breeding pairs that live on top of the landfill, which is exactly where we would want to put solar. So we're working with NAP to see, we also own a bunch of other land south of the landfill that we own for a variety of reasons, and farmers grow stuff on it just so something happens there. And we're looking to see whether maybe some of the areas that grow corn could grow hay. We could create some new habitat to mitigate if we were able to figure out that solution. So I just put that out there that we're having the early discussions with NAP and our ornithologists to make sure that we're doing whatever we can if and when that opportunity for solar comes up at the landfill. And I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. are there any items for our next agenda? All right, our next scheduled meeting is May 24th, and we'll do one last call for public commentary. Anyone here for public comment? All right, I will adjourn this meeting of the Environmental Commission at 8:41.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alice.
Nobody move while I